Hi everyone, my name is Samantha Rosehill and this is week one of Moby-Dick. So I'm going to start us off with just a couple of reflections, framing the book a little bit of an overview, and I'm going to begin by talking about my very selfish personal motivations for having everyone read Moby-Dick together here. Those of you who have been reading with me for the past couple of years know that we have been in the 20th century. We have been very much in the middle of the 20th century. And now we are going back to the early and mid 19th century. We're going back to the early and mid 19th century. Moby Dick was first published in 1851. As some of you already mentioned, of course, Hannah Arendt, who I know brings many of you here, was very interested in Billy Budd and writes quite a bit about it in On Revolution, and uses it as a framework to think about the question of justice and moral responsibility. Those topics will come up in Moby Dick as well, but in a different way. And as I was researching my book on loneliness and looking for the first uses of alone, lonely, loneliness in the 19th century novel, one of the books I was led to was Herman Melville's Moby Dick. And so I found myself rereading this book. I don't know how many times I've read it, and I'll say a little bit about that too. But I found myself rereading this book for the first time, thinking specifically about the ways in which Melville is describing lonely in relationship to that very specific American personality, metaphysics, character that I imagine we will spend some time talking about. And so lonely here we see is used to describe places, the orphan Pip, and Captain Ahab's inner journey. And as tempted as I am to read you Ahab's final speech, which is a meditation, an extended meditation on lonely death, lonely life, loneliness, lonely, lonely. He repeats and cries out over and over. It is going to really draw the way in which we think about loneliness into the modern era. And Melville is one of the authors responsible for that. So that's my very personal, very selfish reason for going back to this book and wanting to read it with everyone right now, thinking about the way in which his singular inward obsession in part captures our modern understanding of loneliness and the search for meaning in the modern world, and the different ways in which people set off on that journey. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the first 19 chapters that we read tonight. I guess the other selfish reason for reading this book is I simply love the sentences. This is the kind of book that I have to be very careful. When I pull it off my shelf and I start reading it, I can't actually stop reading it because I am drawn so intensely and immediately into Melville's language and the play and the way he has these. I'll talk a bit about some of the moves that he makes, going from these kind of delicious material details, and the temperature and the scenery, to these metaphysical and observations of the human condition. As I was putting my notes together for you tonight, I had the thought that, I always say the Hannah Arendt book to read right now is The Human Condition, but I think maybe Moby Dick might be the human condition that we should be reading, perhaps even instead of Hannah Arendt, because it really can be read also as a meditation on that. And of course, there are many debates about how to read this book. What is this book? Some people argue that it should not be read philosophically. Some people argue that it must be read politically. Other people argue that you should not read it politically. There are many debates about whether it is the great American novel. I have not reached any firm conclusions in terms of my own opinion on that question, but as of right now, I place it at the top. I would only perhaps place this book next to Whitman. So in terms of great American literature, maybe I throw Emerson on there just to please Terry, because I know he's on this call in second or third. One of the things that does make this a great American novel are the extended meditations on religion and the religious themes that run throughout the narrative of the text. And we see that already framing the first 19 chapters that we read for tonight. So we get into the different traditions of Christianity, Calvinism, Puritanism, Quakerism, the aggressive Quakers. It's quite funny. Judaism, of course, and Islam, Zoroastrianism, and then paganism and pagan natural traditions. Of course, to board the Pequod, one must convert to Christianity. And we get the nice chapter, the visitation from Elijah the prophet before they venture onto the ship itself. And I assume most everyone is familiar with the biblical story behind the name of Ishmael, our primary character, and the biblical outcast. Our Ishmael is an outcast, a pariah as well. Ishmael was Abraham's first born son with Hagar, Sarah's servant, and after Isaac was born, Ishmael and Hagar were cast into the wilderness, and he grew up alone with his mother in the desert, where God promised him that he would one day become the father of a great nation, and is held up as both a Jewish and Islamic patriarch in the tradition. So there are, as I said, different ways to read this book. And one of the questions I just want to throw on the table for you tonight is, how are you reading this book? Is it a kind of monstrous fable? Is it some kind of weighty allegory? Is it really a kind of catalog of symbolism of America, of the American Republic? Some argue that it is a modern tragic poem that has been structurally shaped to be consistent with into a classic tragedy, that we should read this like Hamlet. That we should read Moby-Dick like Hamlet. So one question is, how are you reading this book? And just a couple of notes. I trained as a good political theorist. I always look for the historical context of whatever text I am reading. And much has also, of course, been written about how Moby-Dick mirrors the political turbulence of the American Republic at that time, the sectional conflict, the debates around slavery, and the moral struggle over the leadership of the Republic. As I was reading this again today, I think a question I always hold in my mind is, how can this book help me to orient myself to think about the future of democracy in America? And I think you can very much read this book as a meditation on the question of freedom, if not the future of democracy. Some people see the Pequod itself as emblematic, as a symbol for the Republic, for the United States. And in the first 19 chapters and some of the conversations around the different Christian and pagan traditions between our, sober cannibal and drunk Christian, we get a little bit of a glimpse right into those undercurrents of religious and metaphysical crises in America that Melville saw. So the religious tensions, the religious debates were fractures. It seemed like hairline fractures on the surface of the underlying metaphysical ruptures of the Republic itself. And one question that I put in my notes for you is, maybe what is that underlying rupture? Is it reparable? I don't think it's just the collapse of faith into reason and the modern era and the search for meaning in a world where we feel homeless and are setting off to conquer something and find purpose. There's something else going on there that Melville is really capturing about this. I want to say the spirit of America in the early part of the 19th century. Okay, so let me see. And the other this was published in 1851. It was, finished during the Compromise of 1850, to go back to my political notes for a second, which was a series of 5 laws that were passed to ease the tensions between the North and the South. D.H. Lawrence famously reads this book as a meditation on the question of whiteness and slavery. It can be read as a kind of fable for democratic protest. And Melville himself was politically active at the time while he was writing this book. In those debates, he was a member of the Young American Society, and he was involved in the debates over imperialist war and the character and future of the Democratic Party itself. Let me see, is there anything else I want to add here? And of course, he spent 2 years on a whaling ship as well, in addition to before he wrote this book. I think what I want to do, given the time and because I want to hear from everyone, maybe save some of those notes for next week. And I actually just really want to jump into the book itself. Does that sound good to everyone? Does anyone want any thoughts or immediate comments or reflections? Always good. Okay, so I am actually going to break with tradition, and I'm not going to start at the beginning. I'm going to turn on screen share. And we are going to start with chapter 1. Can everyone see the text? Chapter 1, Loomings. Call me Ishmael. Some years ago, never mind how long precisely, having little or no money in my purse, and nothing particular to interest me on shore, I thought I would sail about a little and see the watery part of the world. It is a way I have of driving off the spleen and regulating the circulation. Whenever I find myself growing grim about the mouth, whenever it is a damp, drizzly November in my soul, whenever I find myself involuntarily pausing before coffin warehouses and bringing up the rear of every funeral I meet, and especially whenever my hypos get such an upper hand on me that it requires a strong moral principle to prevent me from deliberately stepping into the street and methodically knocking people's hats off, then I account it high time to get to sea as soon as I can. This is my substitute for pistol and ball. With a philosophical flourish, Cato throws himself upon his sword. I quietly take to the ship. There's nothing surprising in this. If they but knew it, almost all men in their degree, some time or other, cherish very nearly the same feelings toward the ocean with me. Thoughts? Feel free to unmute.
I just wanted to say, I just feel like it takes you in and you're by his side. I don't know, it's like it's so uh captures me as a reader, you know? I feel I'm with him right away.
Yes. Can you say why? Do you have a sense of what it is that pulls you under?
Well, I don't know, it's his sympathy towards others, his the language just it's so beautiful. And his understanding of others. I don't know, his sympathy. It comes through.
Hmm. Yeah. It's kind of sympathy. There's a relational quality to the writing. And I think we see some of Melville's, I feel like to even call it rhetorical moves is a little unfair because it's really a form of artistry. It's really a form of weaving. Then I'll point out some of what those are, but I see some other hands. David Altez.
Yeah, it was funny. Someone commented that their bookseller said there's not a good line until page 20. I'm like, did they like just like miss the first paragraph? I mean, it's like whatever you think of the novel, like the first paragraph is just insane. But I was wondering if you have any thoughts on what is that feeling that Melville's talking about that draws him to the sea and that he's saying is so universal that he uses those great terms of um, you know um, when his spleen and regulating his circulatory, but there's an underlying human condition. You mentioned the term a few minutes ago that he's getting at here that is universal. He's claiming. I
Mm.
just wonder if you have any thoughts on what is that impulse he's talking about.
Well, can I can speak to that only from my own subjective position, and I think there are a few different things that come to mind. The overarching word that immediately comes to my mind is a certain form of melancholia, which is the association I have with spleen as one of the humors that Aristotle defines in De Anima to talk about the inner constitution of the individual. And when too much, um, let's say, negative reaction to the goings on of everyday life build up in one and it becomes too overwhelming, the bile in the spleen needs to be expressed. And so there's a way of driving off the spleen, right? The melancholia, when that darkness starts to color everything, one has to get the blood moving again somehow whenever I find myself growing grim about the mouth. And then I think there's also, it is, I want to say, ineffably romantic because he's touching upon that condition of the sublime. When you stand on top of a mountain and you think about throwing yourself off of it, it's not because you want to die, but it's because the pool of that great otherness is so strong. The temptation is very present. So there's that romantic sublime, but then he brings it down to the street. You can see New York in the rain. You can hear the cars. You can smell it. Drizzly November in my soul, right? That kind of internalization of that feeling, of that awareness of our own eventual but inevitable non-existence, so much so that it becomes so overwhelming sometimes one begins to just wish it were already here. And when I read the line pausing before coffin warehouses, I mean, I immediately think of Dickens. I think of, um, I think of, you know, um, sleeping in on the floor in the mortuary next to the coffins, feeling cradled by them. And that's a beautiful line, actually. I'll send it in the notes for you. He says he felt as though the coffins staved off his loneliness because he felt held by them. And, you know, this, I think it's this impulse requires a strong moral principle to prevent me from deliberately stepping into the street. And look at that comma there. It's so graceful. It is so beautiful. You know, you read that and then you pause. And then from knocking other people's hats off, right? So this kind of, you know, gristly, grumbly, knocking about, like that darkness gets overwhelming, and one has to find you know, new vistas to those new sensory experiences. And then I'll just the next, you know, when he pivots here, this is very nice. He goes from these wonderful details, descriptions. He's saying the same, he's unfolding this feeling. And then he goes to the philosophical flourish. And none of this is surprising. Very nearly the same feelings toward the ocean with me. And it's not for nothing that Freud also describes the great, overwhelming, sublime terror of anxiety as the oceanic feeling. You know, I also, it comes to my mind that the Lukács's notion of Daklosigkeit, the idea of ruthlessness in the modern world, that, you know, to be at sea, to be ruthless, to be out a whaling, to be out on that journey. So David, does that help?
Hi.
Oh,
I'm not David.
I know, I was asking David if I helped answer his question.
Yeah, I know, but if I wanted to.
Yes.
Okay.
Go on.
All right.
Peggy,
Okay.
all yours.
All right.
I see.
Yeah. Two things. One is this evocation of violence immediately
Yes.
in the novel was shocking.
Why was it shocking?
Because it's such an elevated state of action that for it to occur immediately, I found disturbing and something to be acutely alerted to, setting a tone, setting an anticipation. And you know, he goes from knocking men's hats off to pistol and ball, perhaps like Cato aimed at himself, but maybe not. So there's this there's a grimness, and there's a taut anticipation of what may occur.
Very much so. Yes. I would say, you know, he sets out both those kind of great unknowns, both the lowercase and uppercase other, right from the beginning. You know, here the awareness of the non-existence or death, and then, you know, with Queequeg we get the pagan other, the cannibal, as the contrast, and then these beautiful passages and meditations on their close friendship, on their being bosom buddies.
The other comment I wanted to make with it, and I think this has to do with the period in which it's written, that there's this exaggeration in what's